It's like this, they says. I can feel my leg, even though I know it's not there anymore. Especially when it's cold, I do. Strange it is, some days even the toes go blue. Figuratively speaking, of course. Wouldn't mind if I still had the bloody thing. Any road, grown to live with it I have. No good crying over spilt milk, is it? Just got to get on with it I have. No bones about it. Sometimes wonder if when I'm dead and gone, it will come out with sympathetic rigor mortis as well, I do. Suppose we'll have to wait and see on that one. Miss the bloody thing I do, sometimes more than others. Nowadays it's just the little things that niggle me that I can't do now like I used to do before I lost my leg. Like hopping on and off the bus, that sort of thing. Nowadays I've learnt to just bide my time, 'cause living with this here crutch, getting about is bloody awkward it is. Still mustn't complain, just got to get on with it I have. Like it or lump it, that's about the top and bottom of it. On the plus side, people are usually very considerate they are on seeing me and this here crutch. It brings out the best in them, it does. Most of the time they smile a mile wide at me, they do. Which makes me smile too. Even when my toes go blue in my phantom leg, when I receive a smile it helps me no end in putting things in perspective, it does. Which brings me into reasoning that losing a leg need not be the be-all and end-all in the whole way of things. After all, when you weigh it up, it could have just as easily been my head that could have been blown off instead of my leg. Then I wouldn't have been able to smile at all, would I? Of course I wouldn't. So now I'm more than happy to make the most of the predicament I just happen to be in. In fact, when I'm in one of those many reflective moods, I thank my lucky stars that I happen to be here at all. Because the day it happened, it broke my bloody heart, it did. Because I witnessed many of my mates being blown to kingdom come, I did. In smithereens they were, all of who would have loved to have had blue toes like mine today. But alas, they're no longer with us to tell the tale like lucky old me. Ever since that fateful day, I often console myself by reasoning that having 3/4 of a body is far superior to having no body at all. Especially so when I look down at the vacant space where my leg used to be, after I'd just tried to scratch an itch, which was never there in the first place. That's when it brings it all home to me, it does. The futility of it all. War, I mean. Having said all that, I would willingly sacrifice my other leg as well, if it would bring back my best mate Sydney, who sadly was blown to kingdom come on the same day I lost my left leg he was. There were no crumbs left of him whereby we could give him a decent burial. We weren't proper soldiers, Sydney and me. He was a plumber by trade and me a painter and decorator. What did we know about wars, I ask you? Apart from a couple of weeks' basic training in Catterick, we could hardly tell one end of a rifle from the other. Quite frankly, we hadn't a clue as to what the hell was going on. And if the truth was known, neither of us liked the idea of pulling the trigger either. Pure fat cannon fodder we were. Any road, there we were in that there trench together and realising the ship we were in for some reason or other, which I can't fathom to this day why, we decided to swap wedding rings. Yes, we did. That's all there was to it. Any road, one of the last discussions Sydney and me ever had, we both agreed that if there was ever to be such a thing as an afterlife, we would both, at Sydney's suggestion, like to come back as a humble pigeon, whereby we could shit all over those that shit all over us. At this we both laughed, we did, looking back, deliriously so. Anyway, that's enough of that sort of thing for now. It was some 10 years after the war was over and done with, when my dead mate Sydney's family took it upon themselves to come up and see their dad's best wartime mate, who I gathered had mentioned me fondly in his Red Cross letters home, before he sadly became dead and gone. It made my day, it did, that they'd come all the way up from Devon to see me. Did me the world of good, it did, 'cause I always up until then had hidden in the back of my mind the true story of Sydney and me from that day to this. To get it all off my chest like this was just what the doctor ordered it was. It was a joy to see them in person, so to speak, because I felt that I knew them already, just the same as Sydney knew all about my family by deed and name, because that's all we talked about during our time together in those bloody trenches. Any road, there they were, the whole tribe of them. There was his wife Mavis and the four of her and Sydney's kids, who before the war had been born consecutively at yearly intervals, and were now all in their teens. Would have been bloody proud of the lot of them, he would. Oh, I wish you could see them now. As I was relating the tale of us swapping wedding rings, you could have heard a pin drop, you could. And then, when I'd gone as far as my tear ducts would allow me to, and I was beginning to slip the ring down my finger with the intention of presenting it to Mavis, whereby she let loose with a scream that shook the rafters, it did. No, 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 Sid would like it to stay exactly where it is, she said. To take their mind off things, I gave them a little tour of our pigeon loft, which surprisingly they took to like a duck to water, they did. Especially so the eldest one, who, like his dad before him, was called Sydney. He hung on to my every word, he did. When he was in the loft, he wanted to know everything he could about the birds, particularly so the one that seemed to take a shine to him, very cheekily perching on his shoulder, which raised a few titters all round, it did. They all took it in turns to gently smooth him down, which the bird enjoyed no end. It cooled the bloody house down, it did. Any road, they all had a bloody good time, they did, all things considered. Mum made a lovely afternoon tea for us all, which went down a treat, it did. Any road, after all had been said and done, it was hugs and kisses all round, with more than a few tears along the way. Then they all took it in turns in kissing the ring on the third finger of my left hand, after which there was hardly a dry eye in the house. Eventually, after all had been said and done, my late mate Sydney's family unceremoniously made their way away to the bus stop just down the road, where the number 39 would take them to the railway station and their train home. As they were alighting the bus, they all took it in turns to each blow a kiss to us, which bowled us over, it did. We just about managed to reciprocate their gestures, but it was hard, bloody hard it was. Sydney Junior was the last of them to board the bus, before which he held aloft the box we had earlier presented him with, which contained one of our very best birds. In fact, it was the very same one that had earlier perched on his shoulder, which he had agreed, at my request, to take back home with him. The theoretical purpose of the exercise being that when they got back to their place, he would release the bird, whereby, if all went well, he would fly back home to us. It'd be a little training exercise for him, I explained to the eager Sydney Junior, who was only too pleased to oblige. When the bus had been and gone, I turned to our Jim and said, "Have me doubts if that there bird will ever fly back to us. Because I have a feeling that there young Sydney is very keen on building his very own loft after seeing ours. And I just know he will do so. Mark my words, Jim, he bloody well will. It's like this, the seas. That there bird in that box, I couldn't help but notice, took quite a shine to that there family. As soon as he clapped eyes on him, he did. Beside himself he was, flapping all over the place. He was the best bloody cock in the whole loft, he was." "What do you mean he was?" demanded young Jim. "You feel so sure he won't fly back to us." "Why is that, Dad?" "Because, lad, you see, that there bird from the moment he hatched, I just knew he was a bit special. It was the way he looked at me that gave the game away for me. Anyway, that's enough of that for now, but between you and me, I have this here theory of the seas that when they set that bird free, he won't head back here. Of course he bloody well won't. Mark my words, lad, he'll just hang around their rooftops until that there young Sydney builds a proper loft like ours for him, which I'm bloody sure he will do much sooner than later he will. You see, Jim, Mother Nature's got a funny way of things when it comes down to that sort of thing. You see, lad, what goes round comes round, if you know what I mean. I tell you, lad, as sure as eggs are eggs, when that there bird gets to their house, he'll be going nowhere else, that's for sure. You see, lad, When I lost my leg, it made me think, it did, about lots of things that never crossed my mind before, especially when I saw it, my leg, I mean, halfway up that there tree it was. Knew it was mine, I did, because it still had my boot on its foot, it did. Tried to stand up and get it back, I did, which was when Sydney, following my futile gaze, shouted out, looking back deliriously so, "That's your leg up that there tree, I'll go and get it for thee, Bill." Well, that was the last I ever saw of Sydney, my leg and that there tree. You see, they were blown to smithereens, they were. Gone to God knows where. Speaking of who, I screamed at him like I'd never screamed before, even though I knew deep down that this figment of our religious education didn't exist at all. But at the time I'd no one else to turn to. Clutching at an imaginary straw I was, because all around me had been blown to kingdom come. Pure carnage, that's what it was. What else could I do? I was calm at first, praying to him quietly in the way I'd been brought up to do, just politely asking him the reason why. Then, when the pain became beyond a joke, I let rip at him like never before, accusing him of all sorts of blasphemous misdemeanours, the likes of which I could never repeat to your mum. Which is when I passed out, which gave me some sort of relief from the agonising reality of it all. Many days later, how many I had no idea. All I know is that when I woke up, it was in this same military hospital, with not a clue as to what day it was, nor did I particularly care one way or the other. It was like waking up in a knacker's yard. Such was the amount of raw flesh surrounding me. Full of morphine I was. It was there and then that I decided there was no such thing as God at all. Never had been. They couldn't kid me no more. If there had ever been such a thing, he would have surely intervened. Of course he would, wouldn't he? Any road, I also suspected that the whole religious thing was a load of old bollocks. Sorry about all that, Jim. But after seeing Sydney's family today, I just had to get it all off my chest, I did. But will you keep it to yourself, won't you, lad? Jim will now take up the tale, as he replied. Of course I will, Dad. With that, Dad picked up a bird and said, "She's a lovely lass, this one," as he carried her to the loft door, where he gently tossed her into the air and adoringly watched her soar into the clear blue sky, where she flew in a huge graceful arc. Then, when above the loft, she began to perform her tumbling routine party piece. Just for him, I'm sure she did. Never saw me Dad cry before, but when he was watching that there bird performing them their tumbles, I couldn't help but notice a little tear forming in the corner of those now reddened eyes of his. Then instinctively, as though sensing I'd blown his cover, he wiped his coat sleeve over his eyes and said, with no more to do, "See you later, Jim." That's all, you see. He don't like no song and dance, me Dad. Because he knew, as well as I knew, that if he'd have stayed much longer, the two of us would have ended up roaring like two newborn babies. We would. And that would never do for me Dad. Never heard him swear or out like that before. Now, as that there bird flew back into the loft, he picked her up, kissed her on the head, then ever so gently placed her back on her regular perch and said, "Thanks for that, lass, I needed that." Whereby the bird cooed her little heart out, she did. After all was done and dusted, I helped him on with his overcoat, put his scarf around his neck and said, "See you later, Dad." To which he replied, "Hey lad, don't be late, as your mum will have the dinner on and she's told me it's shepherd's pie tonight." Then I watched him uncomplainingly leaning on his crutch, making his way home. He's a lovely bloke, is my Dad. Just after the war, when I was a youngster, to see people walking around town, in every town, everywhere, you used to see people without limbs, you know, legs missing, arms missing, and you see people on crutches, because they were war veterans, and that was before the days of having these little scooters, electric. They didn't have them. Sometimes they had the big wheelchairs with big, you know, wheels, and anyhow, so it wasn't unusual in those days to see people. So this is about a guy like that.